When I'm filming my Minic, I constantly get the same questions asked of me. Why do the cars go so fast? Can't you make them run any slower? Well, the answer to that is yes and no. The problem really is the fact that what you're dealing with is a 1960 toy, and as such it's not that wonderfully sophisticated. These of course were introduced to the market with hand controllers, so you stood there and you drove the car with your hand controller, and that was absolutely fine. But of course when you have a proper scenic railway such as this, what you really want to be able to do is just set it all running and stand back and admire it, not be fussing about trying to drive the cars while you really want to watch the trains go round or the vehicles interact with the trains. And the problem certainly with my layout is the fact that I've built in several problem areas which preclude you from doing this, and I'll go on to explain a little more fully in a moment. So if we start by taking a look at the cars and the different variations, what you see here are two Humber Super Snipes, a green one and a maroon one. The maroon one was one of my original toys from when I was a child, and you see the two different bits of engineering that make up these vehicles. The maroon car has an early chassis, steel construction on the bottom with a big brass gimbal pickup, and the green car has the later Speed 6 engine, which has a different set of pickups. But unlike your Scale Electrics and every other manufacturer, of course, it runs in a slot instead of brushing along strips on the track, which is the more conventional way of doing it, how most other manufacturers do. That in itself gives problems because you need to overcome the resistance of the brass pickups on the track, which itself can be difficult, and I believe that's what leads to an awful lot of burnt out motors, especially in the Speed 6 variety. The other thing, of course, if you look at the early chassis, the front wheels quite normally don't sit on the track at all. So what happens is the rear wheels have the job of actually pushing that brass gimbal round, which is terribly hard work, and that also applies to a lesser extent to the brass pickups there as well. If you now look at my actual layout, in an effort to make this visually more interesting and indeed more entertaining to run cars on, my layout is quite complex. I have built in as many bits of track from the Minic catalogue that I can, including of course some never was's. And as you see, it goes round, it's on two levels, and you've got a gradient and all the other bits and pieces. If we look at it in more detail, you realise that to overcome some of the obstacles that I have actually built into this track, unfortunately you need a bit of speed. Item 1, the much talked about reverse hazard. This of course is where the Porsche backs across the road. Now the problem here is that underneath that single bit of track that you see the Porsche backing across, there's a metal arm that works off an electric motor installed in the back of the garage. But it does mean that that quarter section of track has no pickups. So the only way you're going to get a car across it is by giving it more speed. Too slowly and it will just stall on that dead section of track. Going on round the circuit, we come round here and we come to the road rail section. Here of course you've got bits of railway track and strange bits of brass insert in the Minic track, all of which, no matter how much you play with it or strip it and rebuild it, clean it, fix it, bend it or whatever, never actually leaves a very smooth surface. So again, the cars will, if they're travelling too slowly, just hit this section and stop. And the same goes for the level crossing. The cars can quite easily, the pickups quite easily can catch on the railway track. And I have actually had the situation where a train has moved simply because I was driving a car across the level crossing. But to make an interesting layout, you really want to add these bits in. And then we come to the major problem with trying to get cars to run slowly, is they have to go up this hill. And to do that, you need a bit of speed. They tend to stall normally around about here or on the top gradient section here, because as the car goes up over that slope, so the pickup tends to lift from the track. My next problem section is the roundabout. The roundabout has brass switches in it, basically points. Now I actually run this roundabout only in one direction, I don't use the points, but the blades are still there, and again they produce another hazard that stops you having smooth running. Further to that as well, the section of this roundabout, the bend is considerably tighter than any of the other bends on the track, which of course adds to resistance and then slows the vehicle down. Particularly bad on these sections are the long wheelbase vehicles, the lorries and things, simply because the back wheels, with the roundabout being so tight, have to skid to go round. So again, to overcome that, the only answer is speed. So what's the answer to this? Several people do several different things. One of the main cruxes is the rear tyres, the drive. Because if you haven't got decent rear tyres, the cars, as soon as they meet a moment's restriction, will just skip on the track. And you just get wheel spin and nothing goes anywhere. Now there have been several different people who have manufactured tyres for these cars. Unfortunately, these people have also come and gone out of business. The only people at the moment who appear to be making tyres are K&R replicas. And theirs seem to be quite good, but they do seem to suffer, all the tyres, in fact, in my experience, have seemed to suffer that they go off with age. Once they get a bit old, then they start to go a little hard and they start to skip. The other answer people come up with is to add blue tack to the inside of the body to increase the weight, thereby increasing the grip of the cars, because the cars are quite light. And I do find that a valid point, and I have had success with doing that. Now the other thing that has been suggested to me, and I do use and I find it more successful, is the feedback controller. The feedback controller, of course, increases the power to the engine of the vehicle when it encounters a resistance, gradients or not so good bits of track, and thereby increasing the power, thereby helping the vehicle get over it. And to a greater and lesser extent that works. But as yet I've yet to encounter a completely fail-safe way of making Minic cars go across difficult bits of track, up gradients or around the tight roundabout section reliably and work every single time. The exception to this appears to be the buses. The buses travel quite slowly because they're low geared. You can also put a fair bit of weight in them, and they do seem to be able to tackle the odd bits of track that are a little difficult. So I hope that answers the question, why, Derek, on your layout do the cars go so fast? The answer is they have to. Now please do join in the comments on the Facebook page and let me know what you've had success with, because I know some of our members have their cars running beautifully, but also on bits of track which are to all intents and purposes completely flat and do not have any, what can we call it, challenging bits of tracking. And there we are. So I hope every time I post a video and someone's asked me why do the cars go so fast, you can rely back to this one. Good night all, speak to you again soon.